So, after so much talk and so much hype, build to rent is here. 75,000 BTR homes are complete, 50,000 are being built, more than 115,000 are in planning, but as we saw in the slides yesterday morning, still actually a very niche product in the wider rental sector. So, who's buying into the BTR dream? What do consumers want? Is it broadband and Wi-Fi, or is it bike racks and fancy wallpaper? We're going to unpick what we know about the BTR market in a session called BTR Design for Operation, with a brilliant panel of Uber BTR experts over here. Well, I'm going to do the same thing again. If you introduce yourself very briefly, just enough to give them a clue as to who you are, and we'll go around the table.
Thanks.
Do you want to go first?
Hi, I'm Rory Cramer. I'm CEO and co-founder of HomeViews. In a nutshell, we're the TripAdvisor for new build developments in the UK, but we have particular coverage of build to rent. We're able to define the resident experience in build to rent versus build to sell and other housing sectors.
Okay, that was at the very limits of short, but yeah, carry on.
Segi Rubin, I'm the founder and CEO of 10A Living. We're rolling out a portfolio of build to rent across the UK, targeting millennials and Gen Z.
Excellent, that's perfect length, yep.
Hi, Richard Angel, CEO and co-founder of Angel Donnell. We are an interior design business. We're designing within the residential space and specifically within BTR in their front of house and amenity spaces.
Okay, good.
I'm Brendan Geraghty. I'm an architect and I'm also the chief executive of the UKAA, which is the body that represents the build-to-rent industry, and we really are the authority on build-to-rent in the UK.
The authority, okay. Don't hide your light. Sagi, I'm going to start with you actually. Let's just sort of unpick our title. So, design for operation. Don't know what it means. Help me.
So, design for operation, in my view, and again, our view is we're an investor, we develop, and then we own. So it's a long-term
all three stages.
Vision, yes. And for us, that means how do we gain efficiency in operation and also a very valuable user experience in that. And when I think about design, it actually has two levels. One being the level that you can see. So it's the look and feel of the design. But another, maybe even more important one, is the invisible element, which is the processes of build to rent. It's the customer journeys in build to rent that you have to design in order to enable the operation.
So it's sort of moving in, moving out, day-to-day running, where your parcels go, where the nearest...
Exactly. It starts from, even before moving in, how do I find my apartment? And it ends with, how do I move out or how do I upgrade? Everything in between, and then carve all those customer journeys, and how do you need to design them to work efficiently, seamlessly, both from a user perspective, from the tenant perspective, and from the operator perspective. So to, as an investor, your gross to net, the margin you're left with is extremely important, and every basis point you earn there is significant.
And I guess, well, maybe this is one, Brendan, you can pick this up. And we're talking about the sort of clients for BTR. Who are they? What do they care about from the design for operation point of view? What are the things that they are going to be drawn to?
Well, there's two things really. There's the customer base, which has already been described, and then there's the operators who will need to make sure that the building runs efficiently and that they achieve the revenue from the building itself. And the two really work very, very well together. I think the customer experience piece is really about customer satisfaction and making sure that they're happy. It starts with the curb appeal and runs all the way through. On the operational side, though, there's an awful lot of back of house related functions which you don't find in, say, residential or for sale buildings, that are about the smooth running and the enhancement of the customer experience. A very good example of this is parcel delivery. With more and more Amazon or sort of deliveries, the idea of a little post room stuck away in the corner is just completely inadequate. And there's many examples of poor concierges just hidden behind a wall of cardboard boxes. As controlling and managing that type of thing, which is where build to rent is different, because it's about the customer experience and making sure that that customer experience is not compromised.
Actually, it's also about brand, isn't it? You know, actually, if you look at the experience in the States, obviously a much more mature BTR market, you know, people have a loyalty almost to a certain provider, which is based on having the right experience all the way through the operation.
Well, brand is really an emotional language, and certainly I developed a concept which is brand before building, which is really understand what the proposition is in broad terms, emotional terms, not just in product terms. So brand needs a product, or it doesn't always need a product, it can also be a service, but that it's more than just the product. It's what it's the proposition and what the building or the operator stands for, and trying to get a value alignment with the customer base.
Yeah, I want to talk to Richard about the sort of interior design, for want of a better phrase. I'm going to guess that actually it's quite easy to get this horribly wrong. And I mean, I'm just imagining there's a sort of sense of, oh, we'll make it really trendy and we'll do this and we'll have. And actually, maybe sometimes people want something just a bit more basic. They just need the thing to work. What are the sort of buttons that you think BTR operators need to be pressing in order to, you know, at least get above base level?
Well, they need to know their customer,
right,
for starters. And if you don't understand who your customer is, then how can you design for it? So, yeah, we look at this time and again and think about that seamless entry, that the moment that a customer, and I'm deliberately calling it customer as opposed to a tenant, because they're the one who pays all of our bills, they walk through the door, they've got to be wowed straight away. And that's not just through some fluffy cushions, it's trying to think about the whole experience as they come in, and especially up to amenity spaces, and creating a sense of community through the interior design. And it's incredibly important, especially in BTR buildings. I mean, we're often looking at, we designed 10 George Street for Virtus, and one of the things that we felt quite strongly there was that the design has got to move seamlessly between sunrise and sunset, and you know, it's no good, you know, sending out nightclub vibes when people are trying to work or have a morning coffee, and equally you don't want to look like the set of This Morning when they're pouring their first glass of rosé. So you know, we concentrate quite heavily on that customer experience.
Lighting and that kind of thing, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, lighting, the way that seating works, so that you can create interaction between neighbours, and so that people can meet. I mean, often...
I suppose our first experience of BTR in this country actually was Friends, wasn't it? You know, the TV show. That's where we saw it. And it was Central Perk. That was where they all went to go and meet each other. Yeah. And it was like kind of, what kind of place is this? You know, we didn't recognise it at all in this country. All these people living in different apartments. Who was the landlord? The greasy carpets didn't seem to exist. And they had this rather lovely cafe down the bottom. But those places to meet where you can actually create the community, I mean, obviously that's partly a design function of the building, but presumably you need to think really hard about where you put them, how you put them, thinking if you've got a tall building, you know, are you going to have double height in some places to give you a slightly different feel?
Absolutely. So it's thinking about the versatility of spaces, and you know, ultimately we are working for the developers, and we try to think about how they might want to monetize that space, or what they want to do in terms of thinking about different things that they've got to adhere to. For example, we worked on a building where, as part of a Section 106 obligation, our client had to create a child's play space within the building. So, and we knew that for the demographic, it just wouldn't work as a dedicated play space. So we designed it in such a way that it worked as both a co-working space and a kids' play space. And I know
I'm struggling with this.
For so many people where they have young children, and you're living in a high-rise, you know, you're living in an apartment below, you haven't got the space for kids' toys and everything else, so you come downstairs to this space where you can tap away at your computer, you can see what's happening with your children playing, but equally it had to be that the space wasn't staffed, because from an operational point of view, we were thinking about our clients' cost base. And so there were various intricacies that meant that we could leave it to the responsibility of the parents to use the space, and the kids and the parents enjoy it. It's well used.
So you're desperately trying to write that thesis, and at the same time you've got some 2-year-old bawling his head off. Anyway, I can see it might be an interesting space sometimes. Incidentally, please do go on to Swapcard, put any questions you have, comments, thoughts on this session on there, and I'll try and incorporate that into our discussion. Equally, at some point I'm going to brave the roving microphone and hope that somebody in the room has got the chutzpah to actually ask a real question, but we shall come on to that. No one's asked anything on it so far, not on my phone anyway. Rory, let's talk about what they really want, because you actually have data. You do talk to BTR customers, clients, tenants about what they like, what they don't like. And what are the sort of big messages, do you think, for BTR operators in terms of actually what clients really do want?
Well, it's really interesting. In the Build to Rent report we released last year, so HomeViews now has 36,000 reviews right across every sector.
Yeah, perhaps you could just explain very briefly what you do.
So HomeViews is a resident review portal. So we're purely dedicated to new builds. We cover build to sale, build to rent, and housing associations. And we have particular coverage in the build-to-rent sector, so 89% of all build-to-rent buildings of over 50 units in the UK have a review on HomeViews, and they're verified resident reviews. They're people that live in the buildings. And what's really interesting, I think, to put into context what build-to-rent is getting right, you have to look at the reviews from residents in build-to-sell, whether they're a private tenant with a private landlord or whether they're an owner. And some of the big challenges in build to sell is, the owners are paying a service charge for all of these amenities and all of these facilities. And they're also dealing with an ongoing management system which doesn't really work. Residential management is one of the top complaints on HomeViews. So where build to rent has stepped in is having this institutional owner and manager, but also creating a sense of community, which is really missing in a lot of other build to sell buildings. So I think that talking about space and how it's used, the top rated buildings on HomeViews for facilities that are built to rent, none of them have a pool. A few of them have a gym. All of them have face-to-face staff, so concierge, and all of them run events and community spaces. And obviously you need a space for that event. And I think that, going back to your friend's analogy, if you have some of the top-rated buildings on HomeViews are just really well run from a community perspective, and they have a space that's flexible. Well, I had the joy of attending a tequila night on Friday night at one of the build-to-rent buildings in Manchester a few years ago. It was dangerous. But the next day it was being used for families to get together. The day after it was dog owners. So I think the use of space and the flexibility of that space is so key, and it's not always about throwing the kitchen sink at facilities and amenity. It's about creating that space for people to get to know each other.
And if I can jump in, so I absolutely agree with Rory, and I'll just pick on a point that Richard mentioned, which is extremely important. It's the wow factor, right? But the most dangerous opposite to the wow factor is the empty factor. And what I see a lot, and I'm sure we've all seen, is very expensive luxury entrances that are wow and are empty from people. They don't get used. And so the activation of the space is extremely important, because there is some magic to design. And that magic is when you get the community together and you get a vibe in an area. And it actually can be done with non-expensive furniture in that sense, but it has to be done right, and the fit and the combination has to work.
So, Richard, let's talk about the lobby, because you said you want wow. It's true, though. Whenever you sort of stay anywhere, even in a hotel, you probably just want to go to your room, don't you? You don't want to hang around in this, unless there's a good reason for doing so. So you probably don't want to spend too much money on that.
No, I disagree. It's all about balance. And you've got to create a wow, you've got to create curb appeal, but you want to have people hanging out in these spaces.
So how do you help them do that? Because this is, the human beings obviously like to be somewhere where they feel really safe and secure, which is behind their own front door. You're suggesting, no, don't go there, which is just 2 floors up. Hang around in this bit of communal space. So how do you convince them that's a good idea?
Well, I think the design is, of course, important to that, but back to Rory's point, it's that front of house. This is a hospitality asset, really, at the end of the day, and it's having that sense of not only do you know the person on the front desk, but they almost feel like your friend, and then you stop and you chat and you have a conversation, and then it brings everyone, naturally brings everyone together. So the individuals that work for you are as important as everything else that's going on. You've got to know that they are representing you and your brand as the developer, as the funder, and if they're not up to scratch, then that can have a seriously detrimental effect. So that's everything is so interlinked with each other. So
yeah, Brendan.
I mean, Built to Rent is not trying to be different from normal homes where we create community. The community part is really, really important, because when we feel like we belong somewhere, our happiness factor goes up a bit. So Built to Rent, you rent the entire building, not just your apartment. There's a lot of curated and managed events, because that's what brings people together. So mature operators will have something going on pretty much all of the time, not 24/7, but weekly events, and maybe seasonal or whatever the case may be. So that the activation isn't just purely a design issue, although that's very, very important. It's really about how the space and the experience of the building is managed. And if you speak to long in the tooth operators, I'll tell you, we seem to just organise our customers' social lives for them. But in some respects, that's what it is. Because
sorry, but you're not sure we're hearing you very well. It was. I don't know if you could hear it. If you didn't, it was fantastic. Carry on, Brendan.
So the community piece is really.
I'm not sure we're still hearing you. Is that working now?
Hello?
Yeah, that's better.
The community piece is really quite important, and we're in residential or for sale properties, we use a generational time scale to establish community as we become embedded. Built to Rent wants to do the same thing, but we have to do it in 18 months, or we have to do it in a year so that we get a renewal. And the tools that we use are the amenities and the events and the curating of activities within the building to create that sense of belonging. So we have to short circuit what is otherwise an organic process.
Who is the sort of median client, as it were? What age are they? And who are you thinking of? Or is this something, we've already discussed, some people are going to be with young families, some are going to be a little older. In fact, there's a question from Anonymous, been very busy again. How do you cater / design for multi-generational tenants in a large BTR site? And I suppose that's a huge challenge, isn't it? Because what's wow to one generation might just be, oh, this is far too much to another.
Well, the UKA runs a survey every year where we title, who lives in Built to Rent, and we do it in fact with Rory. So we do have a good profile of who the residents are. And
I suppose the sense is that BTR is people who perhaps are going to own their own home one day, and so they tend to be younger. I'm assuming that that's right.
A big proportion of them are younger people, and a lot of the design is geared towards it. But it's not the only occupants. There are older people. There's downsizers, divorcees. It has everybody. It's not a demographic specific product.
Rory, on that then, when you're thinking about, you're a BTR developer, say, and you're thinking, how am I going to design my building? What am I going to make it look like and feel like and operate? People are going to have different demands. If you're retired, you're going to have a very different, interest in how that building operates than if you are 19 and single.
Absolutely, but I think that the supply. We're at the very beginning of the Built to Rent journey. It's amazing how quickly it's growing. But I think that we've got to put into context 75,000 completed units. I hear different numbers bowled around, but I think that where those units have been delivered and the type of buildings they're in appeal at the moment to, I think, a specific socio-demographic. But you're going to see in the next 3 years a huge wall of single-family housing built to rent,
Right.
so houses that are rental, and lots of different models within that space. So while built to rent, I would say, because of the geographic locations, the type of buildings that have been delivered to date, has been a certain demographic. Not to say, I spoke to a downsizer at East Village, Get Living. He'd sold his house in Victoria Park. He was in his 70s. He'd moved into East Village because it was safe. There was a concierge there. He had lift access, lateral living, and his grandkids want to visit him all the time because there's so much going on his doorstep. So I think that, you know, the benefits of build to rent can be multi-generational.
Yeah.
But I just think, you know, with where the supply has been to date, it's kind of dictated the demographic that's gone to it. But I think we're going to see that change.
Big change. So in terms of the way you're thinking about how the market's going to develop, I think we probably agree that it has been the sort of 20-something, 30-something market that has predominated. Are you thinking about sort of changing the offer in a way of the kind of BTR developments that you've got that's going to appeal to a broader demographic?
Yeah, so one, I totally agree, it's cross-generational. So there's going to be, from the day you finish university, where you had maybe student housing, and after you sort of retire and your kids leave the home and you move back to live in the city center. What I am a big opposer of is one fit for all. I think you have to start out with knowing who the target tenant, the target client, as you say, is, and you have to design for them.
This, the 70-year-old guy who moved into, which one was it?
East Village.
East Village.
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
why not?
Because that's what he got, is a feel of being young and a great community that's very young, and it made him happy. And we have buildings that we've done where we targeted them for sort of 20 to 30, 20 to 40-year-olds, but actually there was a huge demand from retirees that wanted to live there, and that's great. But I think the product has to be focused on the right segment. And so that's for what we're doing here in the UK market, is focusing on, as I said, millennial, Gen Z, and everything is derived from that. And I think different product for, you know, retirees or for families, et cetera, et cetera.
We've had some terrific questions, anonymous questions, which have come through. So let me just throw a few sort of quick rapid-fire ones. What's the difference between BTR and co-living? That's for you.
Well, I think co-living is part of BTR. And co-living in itself, I think, has a lot of definitions. So I don't think, you know,
we're getting hung up here.
Inherently, the way I understand co-living, it's a very specific target segment that is willing and open to share some of the amenities, personal and common. But the way I view it, and even the projects we're doing, we have projects that have micro apartments. I don't call them co-living, but you could say, well, we're sharing. You know, if you go back in history, even 100 years ago, using a shared stairwell was called co-living, and it wasn't even acceptable.
Right.
So it depends how far you take it. But I think it's one of multiple uses.
Okay, all right. It's another question for you, Brendan. So is the key to being an effective BTR owner really being a top events manager?
I mean, on one level, once the building is there and it's been well designed and all the rest of it, there is a little bit of that in this. You know, build to rent does two very important things. It has to be a home, so it has to have all the emotional content that's associated with home, but it also has to be a performing asset. It has to generate revenue for the investors. Our homes haven't had to do that before, and that's what build to rent is what's unique about it. It's pioneering new ways of living, but it's also having to work quite hard in doing so. So the event, you know, there's a tenant acquisition and retention strategy, which is just good business. And yes, you're a little bit of an events manager, but it's just a layer in the cake. I mean, it's part of the whole process.
No bad thing. Okay, we like events. Digital solutions. Okay, Richard, maybe you could help us with this. Are you using any digital solutions / apps to accommodate / enhance the physical community? I mean, you kind of think of BTR, they're younger, they're probably going to be, you know, really into their apps and their Wi-Fi and all of that. Is that a key part of what needs to be offered?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I can't talk from the operator's perspective, but you need to be able to provide ease for all of the occupants, and that will invariably come through apps and where they can access everything, whether it's booking a spin class or reserving a cinema room or whatever it may be, and then seeing what events and everything else are going on. So creating that ease is pretty important, and I think now all of us, we're very used to using apps and in our everyday lives. So
is that, in terms of your product, is that a key part?
For our target market, it's a binary. I mean, it's part of the life for them. You cannot not have an app that provides that this is how they will.
And is it all the sort of smart building stuff? So is it about going through locks, getting,
Well, that goes, one is obviously, expected, but it's also a key element for us in terms of driving efficiency through operations.
Yeah.
And that is, I touched on before, we spend a lot of time designing upfront and thinking about how do we reduce manpower, how do we reduce the time to treat a call if there's a failure, and that is done through automation throughout the building and throughout the life cycle of the client.
People I'll come to one second. There's some fantastic questions on here. Will any of the panel build a BTR building in the metaverse? That's the question for the conference, really. I'm not. Will Adam Naumann be able to outperform everyone else in the BTR space? Okay, sustainability has been a hot topic of these last 2 days, but to what importance is it considered within interiors for the likes of fitted furniture and kitchens? I'm going to take that question and slightly widen it, actually. Come on to you, Rory. To what extent are BTR clients prepared to pay more for a truly sustainable green home? What does the evidence say?
It's a really timely question. We've got a sustainability report coming out on the 11th of October. So one of the questions we asked...
Same day as my book, which I've got coming out.
There we go.
Do look it up.
Two plugs in one. But we ask every resident type, not just build-to-rent tenants, but is sustainability important to them?
Yeah.
The reason why we asked that is because no one was talking about it, which was quite depressing. And we were 2 years into our journey, and we thought we need to get this data. We need to understand what the customer values. So if they select yes, they then select 10 features of their home that are most important to them. And what's really interesting when you look at the data is by age group, by location, by building type, it changes significantly. Right. Sadly, first-time buyers care less about sustainability than older generation because they care more about affordability, which would be obvious. But when you look at build-to-rent tenants in particular, obviously a lot of that stock is urban at the moment. It's the practical day-to-day things that have an impact on them. So really good recycling services, so they really genuinely feel like that is being taken care of and looked after. Renewable energy saving measures, and I think something
as a money-saving thing rather than a planet-saving
as a money-saving, but also as just an awareness point. I think a lot of our we're only just seeing the impact of every front page of every paper. About the energy crisis. And I think that will come into its own in terms of recalibrating what's important to people, how does it affect their wallet. But it's being practical about sustainability. I think the big thing for me is there aren't any brands really or any buildings that are putting sustainability at the front of how they market themselves. And I do think that whether we feel that the current climate goes away and we get back to normal life, I think people will start choosing buildings by their sustainable credentials.
Do you?
I really do.
Will they pay more for it?
I don't know if it's about a premium initially. I think it's more about differentiation. And if you think of build to rent, a lot
so
of
the kind of cool vibe is actually, and we care about the planet.
100%.
Yeah,
for sure. That narrative is part of how people want to decide where they live and how they live. So I think the brands that get on the front foot of that are future-proofing how people view their brand and choose. And
future-proofing, Richard, in other ways as well. I mean, we know what's coming down the track to some extent in terms of zero carbon legislation and so on. So I'm imagining, to answer the specific question that was put on the thing, actually, of course, you're going to be thinking really hard about sustainability in all the design that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are various tools out there for designers and contractors. There's 2050 Materials, which is a single platform where you're able to source materials based on their sustainability credentials. There are recycling schemes for mattresses. I mean, I couldn't believe it, that in the UK alone, 7.5 million mattresses per year go to landfill. So that's something that we've really got to be aware of as people designing and building BTR.
Is it just because a mattress is quite difficult to kind of recycle? It's, you know, you have to physically take off the cloth and the padding and the springs and whatever else is in there?
There's a company called the Mattress People, and they're able to recycle 7,000 mattresses a week, which doesn't even cut the sides.
No.
But they break it down into 19 component parts and then recycle that. So it's like, I think it's about 95% of the mattress.
Brendan, do you think the sort of for expanding the sector that we're going to need to think harder about the sustainability offer and sell?
We definitely have to. The money is greening, so the capital is greening largely through ESG obligations, but the market is also greening. So customers, from the research that Rory has done and other research that I've seen, people expect the green technology to be there. They say, well, isn't that just normal? Isn't it there already?
That's interesting. Yeah.
So there is an expectation that it is standard, and we're still trying to figure out how to design and build a net zero in use building. I mean, we only really figured that out about 2 weeks ago. There are no net zero in use buildings.
Really?
They are going to come in the coming years. But the bigger challenge is embodied carbon and how we manage and create a chain of custody around that issue, which is a much bigger issue. But in construction, we've done it before. FSC Timber, which of course is certified for timber, was started, maybe not started in the construction sector, but certainly very heavily involved in its delivery. And it took a long time and intergovernmental cooperation to get that model established, but it is now established. And we've done it before, and we can use that to help us with the embodied carbon.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of big issues coming, and there's a lot of expectation coming, and we're sort of stuck in the middle. It feels like, if you remember Star Wars, the first movie, when they went into the garbage disposal thing.
Oh, yes.
Walls started coming in, and it does feel a little bit like that, because we are in a transitional phase right now. We are creating new prototypes. And prototypes are always more expensive. They're always a little bit more difficult. And I think we've got a 10 to 15 year period where we're going to be prototyping buildings. Once we've got through this and we work out how then to deliver them efficiently, we can start to see the costs of those buildings perhaps stabilize. But we are in a difficult, with all the legislation and the building safety bill and ESG and everything else, we've got a huge period of disruption ahead of us.
And I think, I'm imagining, Sagi, that it works both ways. I mean, maybe the evidence isn't yet there that people are prepared to pay a premium for green, but they're probably not going to go to a supplier who has a reputation for not being green. In other words, you really do have to be careful you're on the right side of history here.
Oh, absolutely. I think the tenants, again, the younger tenants for sure, it's almost a binary, they demand it. But I think from our perspective, the economics are actually going to drive it. So it's not that we're paying more to be green, it's that we're being green to pay less.
Yeah.
And in many factors we see it. So we're installing automated sensors and monitoring and control of the units in the common area to properly analyze and see what is being used and what is not, much more efficient use of energy, of water, et cetera, et cetera. It goes down actually to the bottom line. I think those elements that are not economical will get pushed back, especially with the coming year or two. That seems it's going to be a tough time. But I think at the same time, those that are going to be pushed ahead.
Okay, Anonymous, this one's just come in and it's topical. Why do BTR operators not incentivize tenants to reduce their energy consumption? Well, do you?
They should.
They should, yes, but
some
do.
Yeah. Well, no, incentivize is probably the wrong word, but I know that Moda have introduced a sort of a league table of energy use within their building. So
who's the worst energy user?
Well, no, it makes you aware of where you sit within the standings of the residents. Yeah. So it gives you a context as to how your energy use is. I think that's a great way of doing it, just providing people with information on how they use their energy.
Another Anonymous has been so busy today. Is there any appetite for BTR in more remote locations? Well, you mentioned just now that most of it is urban. Could we imagine sort of, I don't know, BTR things in villages in the middle of the Cotswolds or something? Is that possible? For sure. Yeah, you're all nodding. Brendan, tell me.
Well, I mean, I think Built-to-Rent is characterized by large-scale development, so sort of 150 units or and north of that. So in the urban conditions. So where there's a demand for homes, I think Built-to-Rent will go there, and as long as it's viable, then they'll.
But that's the issue, isn't it? Is it viable to do it? Because your customers tend to be younger and more mobile. They're starting their careers and so on, families. They're less likely to want to be in a village in the middle of nowhere.
But single-family housing, so that's the new frontier now. I mean, that's just a regular housing estate.
Sure.
And they will spring up all over the place. And one of the things about single-family housing is that it's got a mature supply chain with the house builders. So it's actually it's going to accelerate very, very quickly because the supply chain is mature. So and they will go again wherever it makes sense in the market for them to go. They tend to be smaller, more around 100 units rather than 200, and they have all the same characteristics. But it's a long lease, and it's about families, sort of putting roots down in the community.
And if they want to buy, I mean, is there a way that people can say, I actually want to own this? Or is that sort of breaking the space-time continuum?
Yeah, that's difficult. I think it is a rental product.
Yep.
It's single ownership. Its job is to provide homes, but also to provide revenue. And as soon as you start to break up that asset, it compromises and muddies the water. So I don't see that.
But there are, I mean, the UK is a very new market in built to rent on a relative basis, but we don't have to sort of guess. We can look at the US,
what happened
Germany.
there?
Well, one, rather than just vertical communities, you've got horizontal communities. The US you've got multifamily all across small villages, big villages, and there are some schemes which I like. I don't know at what stage that get implemented in the UK, where you can sort of buy ownership throughout your rental period. So that has started to happen, but it is, I agree with Brendan, a complex one to solve.
Yeah, and I'm quite interested in this idea of sort of rental estates, because I think in most people's mind they think of a block, don't they? They think of friends, and but the idea that you'd actually have a lot of houses, perhaps even detached homes in a space, all rented from the same landlord. Have we seen that happen in this country?
It already is. I mean, Simple Life, I think, are probably the biggest.
Oh,
and then you've got Places First. I mean, pretty much most of the build-to-rent brands at the moment that are urban will have single-family housing brands. Casa by Moda, Present Made by Apache. And all of them are different. Some of them are amenitized, so imagine a sort of housing estate with a clubhouse in the middle of it that has a creche.
Right.
And then others are much simpler. But we haven't seen, and that is just beginning. And it's amazing, if you look at some major regeneration areas that have maybe 5,000 homes, a portion of those will be built to rent. That's already happening because it's a great way to forward fund the site and de-risk the site. So, I think we're just at the beginning of that journey now.
Well, very quickly from each of you, we've got a minute left. Let's look. So we know where the numbers are. I mean, they are growing fast. I mean, clearly we've got past, we've been talking about this for so long, and now we're actually seeing real homes and lots more in the pipeline. What kind of BTR sector are we going to be looking at in, say, 10 years' time? What kind of place will it have within the wider residential sector? Brendan first.
I mean, I think rental will just absorb all the types. So student, co-living, and then into senior living and so on. It'll just become the rental experience, and there'll be brands which will play into that space at various points along there. I suppose the biggest element of it will still be built to rent, but it will just be a rental experience and the rental economy.
Where do you think we're going to be in 5 years, Richard?
It'll be interesting to see whether it actually challenges us as a nation of homeowners, and whether those who traditionally want to buy a home will say, actually, flexibility.
I guess it's going to be a lot about the
rent.
experience. I mean, that's really what we've been talking about. If you feel really confident in your landlord, this is somebody who's going to look after you on your life journey, perhaps as you move from one property to another in a different part of the country under the same brand umbrella. You know, that kind of experience, which we really don't have in this country, if that happens, I guess that does change the dynamic.
Brand that you know, brand that you actually come to love. And,
and you get loyalty points, and it all helps. What about you?
Oh, absolutely. So the two key things I'm certain of is, one, it will expand across the UK, outside of London, secondary cities, and further on from there. And two, I think there will be countrywide brands where you'll be able to move across the country, across the stages of life as well. So it won't just be locations, it'll be as you mature from, you know, a young professional to a family and then to a retiree, and you'll be able to move through that, which we see in Germany, which we see in the US.
Yeah, and you think it's going to come here. What about you?
I just think it's getting affordable build-to-rent to work. And I mean that with a small a, and I think that's about driving the operation costs down, using technology, and we haven't seen that yet. I think that's going to be a challenge for the sector, but if they can crack that, then I agree with everything everyone else has just said.
Excellent. Well, it's been a great session. Thank you very much, Steve, to Rory, to Sagi, to Richard, and to Brandon. Our panel, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.